Section 6 of Great Events in the History of North and South America. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Great Events in the History of North and South America by Charles Goodrich. United States Early Settlements, New England or Northern Settlements, Part 1. The settlement of New England commenced at Plymouth in 1620. This part of the continent between Penobscot and Cape Cod had been carefully explored in 1614 by Captain Smith. He says, respecting it, of all the 4 parts of the world I have yet seen not inhabited, could I have but means to transport a colony, I would rather live here than anywhere. And if it did not maintain itself, were we but once indifferently well fitted, let us starve. Such was the opinion early formed of the desirableness of this region for colonization. Charles, Prince of Wales, was pleased to call it New England, on account of the favorable impression he received respecting it, from Smith's chart and description. This country was settled by a class of people very different in many respects from that which emigrated to the southern colony. The latter, for the most part, as has been seen, were mere adventurers, having in view the improvement of their secular interests or the eclat of successful enterprise. The colonists of New England saw chiefly the boon of religious freedom for themselves and their descendants, and through it the advancement of the Christian Church in the world, a boon of which they had been deprived in their native land. The ground of this disenfranchisement was their nonconformity to the established English Church, or separation from it. Having, while members of that Church, devised and sought a greater purity in its worship without success, they at length separated themselves from it, and formed a distinct worshipping community. For thus professing to follow the pure word of God, in opposition to traditions and human devices, they were in derision termed Puritans. In the progress of their religious views, and of the persecuting spirit of the government, they passed from mere Puritanism, or efforts at greater purity in worship and in manners, to nonconformity, and from nonconformity to dissent. From difficulties in regard to the ritual of the Church, they proceeded to doctrines. The Puritans and the universities denied a portion of the Apostles' Creed, so called, advocated the sanctity of the Sabbath and the opinions of Calvin, his institutions being read in their schools, while the Episcopal party took the opposite side and espoused the system of Arminius. Both under Elizabeth and James, conformity was insisted on. The latter declared, I will have one doctrine, one discipline, one religion, in substance and ceremony. I will make them conform, or I will hurry them out of the land, or else worse. And he did hurry out of the land many of those who had become obnoxious to him, while the others were more cruelly hindered from leaving the country to suffer from contempt, poverty, or lingering death in imprisonment. Their attempts to escape were frequently frustrated, and it was not without great vexation and loss that portions of this persecuted people exiled themselves from their native country. Their first place of refuge was Holland, where religious toleration had been established by law. The leader of the emigrants on this occasion was the able and pious Mr. John Robinson, who has since been considered as the father of that portion of the Puritans who were the founders of New England. They successively left England, as many as found it in their power, in the year 1606 and the 2 following years. Their first place of residence was Amsterdam, but in 1609 they removed to Leyden, with a view to avoid some difficulties that were felt or foreseen in the former place. Here they received with kindness and continued several years in a flourishing condition under the faithful labors of their pastors. In the meanwhile, notwithstanding their general prospects, there were causes in operation which rendered a change of location, in their case, extremely desirable. These were the unhealthiness of the Low Countries where they lived, the hard labors to which they were subjected, the dissipated manners of the Hollanders, especially their lax observance of the Lord's Day, the apprehension of war at the conclusion of the truce between Spain and Holland, which was then near at hand, the fear lest their young men would enter into the military and naval service, the tendency of their little community to become absorbed and lost in a foreign nation, the natural and pious desire of perpetuating a church, which they believed to be constituted after the simple and pure model of the primitive Church of Christ, and a commendable zeal to propagate the gospel in the regions of the New World. In this situation, they turned their attention towards America. Here they hoped to engage in their original occupation of agriculture, and not merely to enjoy toleration, but to form a society founded on their favorite plan of ecclesiastical order. With this object in view, they first applied to the Virginia Company for a patent, who zealously espoused their cause, but who were unable to obtain from the king a toleration under his seal of religious liberty, though he promised to wink at their heresy, provided they should conduct themselves peaceably. The company granted them permission to make a settlement near the mouth of the Hudson River. They had previously, in the want of adequate capital of their own for the founding of a plantation, been enabled to interest several London merchants in their scheme. These agreed to advance the necessary sums to be repaid out of the avails of their industry. In this way, the emigrants were enabled to purchase the Speedwell, a ship of 60 tons, and to hire in England the Mayflower, a ship of 180 tons, for the intended expedition. The Mayflower alone came, as the smaller vessel proved to be in a leaky condition, and after 2 several trials she was dismissed as unfit for the service. The Mayflower took her departure on the 6th of September, and after a boisterous passage, they discovered the land of Cape Cod on the 9th of November, at the break of day. The number of pilgrims who had embarked was 101, not all who had proposed to come, for the disasters that attended their setting out had winnowed their number of the cowardly and the lukewarm. Their pastor, Mr. Robinson, did not leave Leyden, according to an original agreement that only a part of their company should go to America to make provision for the rest. The pilgrim voyagers found themselves on a bleak and inhospitable coast, and much farther to the northward than they intended to go. In agreement with their wishes, an attempt was made by the master of the ship to proceed to the Hudson, but either finding or affecting to believe the passage to be dangerous, he readily seized on the fears which had been excited, probably by himself, to return to the Cape, with a view to make a landing there. It afterwards appeared that he had been bribed by the Dutch, who intended to keep possession of the Hudson River, to carry the adventurers quite to the northward of their place of destination. They arrived in Cape Cod Harbor on the 11th of November, and being brought safe to land, they fell upon their knees and blessed the God of heaven, who had brought them over the vast and furious ocean, and delivered them from many perils and miseries. At this time, it was thought meet for their more orderly carrying on of their affairs, and accordingly, by mutual consent, they entered into a solemn combination, as a body politic, to submit to such government and govern as laws and ordinances as should be general consent from time to time be made choice of and assented unto. 41 persons signed this compact. It contained the essential principles of a free government, such as have since been embodied in the institutions of Republican America. John Carver was immediately chosen their governor, a man godly and well approved among them. Severe were the trials which awaited this small and lone band of pilgrims. The necessity of selecting a more commodious place for living was obvious, and in the efforts which were made for this purpose, several of them well nigh perished. The excursions of an adventurous band of men, on several occasions, were extremely hazardous, and though generally at the places where they landed, no Indians were found, yet in one instance they came in contact with the latter, and a hostile collision took place between them. By the kind providence of God, however, they were preserved. During one of their excursions into the country, they found a quantity of corn, which they took, with the intention of remunerating the owners, which intention they were afterwards happily enabled to fulfill. This was a providential discovery, which supplied their present wants, and served as seed for a future harvest. An entire month was occupied with these explorations. At last they found a tract where they concluded to consummate their enterprise. Having sounded the harbor in front, they ascertained it to be fit for shipping. Going on shore, they explored the adjacent land, where they saw various cornfields and brooks. Then they returned to the ship, with the agreeable intelligence that they had found a place convenient for settlement. This was on Monday, the 11th of December, answering to the 22nd day, New Style, the day now celebrated in commemoration of the landing of the Pilgrims at Plymouth. The company had kept the Christian Sabbath the day before on an island in the harbor. The ship arrived at the newly discovered port on the 16th. Several days were spent in disembarking, and it was not until the 25th that they began to build the first house. This was a structure of common use, to receive them and their goods. The undertaking, however, was preceded by united prayer for divine guidance. The building having been completed, they began to erect some cottages for habitation, as time would admit, and also consulted of laws and order, both of their civil and military government, as the necessity of their present condition did require. But that which was sad and lamentable, in 2 or 3 months after their company died, especially in January and February, being the depth of winter, wanting houses and other comforts, being infected with the scurvy and other diseases, which their long voyage and their incomodate condition brought upon them. Their reduction by sickness would have rendered them an easy prey to the Indians, but the providence of God had so ordered it that but few of this fierce people existed at that period in the neighborhood of the settlers, and those few were kept back from inflicting any injury by the dread which had almost supernaturally, so to speak, been inspired in their hearts. The paucity of the Indians had been accounted for from a wasting sickness of an extraordinary character, which had visited the region some few years before. Sometime in March of 1621, an agreeable and unexpected occurrence took place at the rendezvous of the whites. It was a visit of an Indian sagamore named Samoset, with professions of friendship for them and satisfaction at their arrival in the country. His kind greeting to them was, "Welcome, Englishmen. Welcome, Englishmen." He spoke in broken English, which he had learned from English fishermen on the eastern coast. This was an event of great consequence to the settlers, as they learned from him many things in respect to the region around, and the Indians that inhabited it. He came to the English settlement again, with some other natives, and advised the emigrants of the coming of the great Sachem, named Massasoit. In a short time this chief made his appearance, in company with his principal associates, particularly an Indian named Squanto, who proved to be of signal service to the whites. He had learned the English language, in consequence of having been carried to England by an English adventurer. Mutual fear and distrust took place between the parties. As Massasoit came in sight on the hill which overlooked the place, after they each had taken proper precautions against surprise, through the agency of Squanto they came together, and the result of the interview was a league of peace, which was kept inviolate more than 50 years. The visit was not much prolonged. Samoset and Squanto stayed all night with us, and the king and all his men lay all night in the wood, not above half an English mile from us, and all their wives and women with them. They said that within 8 or 9 days they would come and set corn on the other side of the brook, and dwell there all summer, which is hard by us. That night we kept good watch, but there was no appearance of danger. The plantation at Plymouth enjoyed the benefit of Squanto's presence with them after the departure of the others. He was a native or resident of the place, and almost the only one that was left, and being acquainted with every part of it, his information was made highly useful to the colonists. They learned from him the method of cultivating corn, and where to take their fish, and procure their commodities. He continued among them until the day of his death, in the spring of 1621. Mr. Carver was confirmed as governor for the succeeding year, but his death occurred soon afterwards. Mr. William Bradford was chosen his successor, and Mr. Israel Allerton his assistant. The intercourse of the colonists with the Indians continued to be of a friendly character, the former having during the summer made several excursions into the country around, particularly one to Shawmut, Boston, where they had an interview with Obataniwa. One of the parties to the submission signed a short time before at Plymouth. He renewed his submission, receiving at the same time a promise of deference against his enemies. The small number of colonists was increased before the end of the year by an accession of 35 persons, among whom was a very active and pious agent, Mr. Robert Cushman. He became eminently useful to the plantation. Upon the departure of the ship conveying this latter company, the colony received a threatening token from the Narragansett tribe of Indians, a circumstance which induced them to fortify their little settlement as well as they were able, and to keep a constant guard by day and by night. Happily, no attempts at that time were made to disturb their peace. This event occurred in the year 1622. In the following year, a vigorous and successful attempt under the brave Captain Miles Standish was made to defeat a conspiracy formed by the Massachusetts tribe, with several others, against a recent English settlement at Wessagusset, Weymouth. This settlement had been formed under Mr. Thomas Weston on his own account and consisted of 60 men. The slaughter of several of the conspirators so terrified the Indian tribes concerned in the conspiracy that they fled from their homes into swamps and desert places, where many of them perished. This generous service on the part of the Plymouth colony towards the neighboring plantation redounded greatly to their credit, especially as the latter were merely a company of adventurers and had been guilty of injustice towards the Indians. The present year proved to be a year of suffering, in consequence of the scarcity of food. The following affecting account is given by Bradford. But by this time our corn is planted, our victuals are spent. Not knowing at night we're to have a bit in the morning, we have neither bread nor corn for 3 or 4 months together, yet bear our wants with cheerfulness and rest on Providence. Having but one boat left, we divide the men into several companies, 6 or 7 in each, who take their turns to go out with a net and fish, and return not till they get some, though they be 5 or 6 days out, knowing there is nothing at home, and to return empty would be a great discouragement. When they stay long, or get but little, the rest go a digging shellfish, and thus we live the summer, only sending 1 or 2 to range the woods for deer. They get now and then one, which we divide among the company, and in the winter are helped with fowl and ground nuts. It is recorded that after a drought of 6 weeks, the government set apart a solemn day of humiliation and prayer, which was almost immediately followed by a copious supply of rain. In the language of the chronicles of the times, it is thus spoken of. Though in the morning when we assembled together, the heavens were as clear, and the drought as like to continue as it ever was, yet our exercise continuing some 8 or 9 hours before our departure, the weather was overcast, the clouds gathered together on all sides, and in the morning there still such soft, sweet, and moderate showers of rain, continuing some 14 days, and mixed with such seasonable weather, as it was hard to say whether our withered corn or drooping affections were most quickened or revived. Such was the bounty and goodness of our God. Soon after, in grateful acknowledgment of the blessing, a day of public thanksgiving was observed. Thus, by a judicious historian, Thomas Robinson, D.D., is believed to be the origin of the annual Thanksgiving of New England. Towards the close of the summer, 2 ships arrived at Plymouth, bringing 60 emigrants, some of them the wives and children of such as were already in the colony. Those that came in the first 3 ships, the Mayflower, the Fortune, and the Anne, are distinctively called the Old Comers, or the Forefathers. In 1624, Plymouth contained 32 dwellings, about 180 inhabitants. Bradford was re-elected governor, and for assistance to him were also chosen. To each person and his family an acre of land was given in perpetuity. The first neat cattle in New England were brought over this year by Edward Winslow. The colonists had at that time no small trouble with several of the newcomers, particularly with one John Lyford, a minister, and another by the name of Oldham, who were disposed to act in opposition to the laws and orders of the colony. The persons above mentioned, however, soon perished, Oldham having first become apparently a penitent. The congregation of the Puritans at Leyden was broken up on the death of their pastor, Mr. Robinson, in 1627. They desired to remove to New England, but only a part of them were enabled to come. The others settled in Amsterdam. Mr. Robinson had hoped to emigrate, but the expense of the undertaking could not well be met, and his death now preventing, only his wife and children came with the portion of the congregation that crossed the water. His place in the colony was supplied by Mr. William Brewster, a ruling elder in the church, and a man every way qualified as a spiritual guide of the people. End of section 6.